Was it murder or suicide? I'm talking about the horrific stabbing death of 27-year-old Ellen Greenberg. It's a question that's been hotly debated since the first grade teacher was found dead in the kitchen of her Philadelphia apartment by her fiance in 2011. She had been stabbed nearly 2 dozen times, 10 stab wounds alone in the back of her head and neck, bruises all over her body. Since that gruesome discovery more than 14 years ago, the quest to determine the cause of Ellen's death has been marked by a series of reversals, revisions, and recriminations. A medical examiner first ruled Ellen's death was a homicide, only to reverse that weeks later to a suicide to match police reports. Then he changed his mind a third time, going back to homicide. But by then, he was no longer in office, so the suicide ruling stuck. All along, Ellen's parents waged a battle to have their daughter's cause of death re examined, refusing to believe Ellen would kill herself. Finally, the current Philadelphia medical examiner complied and reviewed Ellen's case, and she just released her ruling, which reaffirmed the earlier conclusion that Ellen's death was, in fact, a suicide. The ruling brings no satisfaction to those like her parents who steadfastly cling to the belief that Ellen would never commit suicide, especially in such a gruesome way. So, does the medical examiner's findings settle the case for good? And what does this flip flop of suicide homicide ultimately mean to the defense if someone is ever charged? I'm criminal trial attorney Sara Azari, and this is Serving Justice, where we focus on what matters most in a criminal case, the defense, of course. And today I'm joined by NewsNation reporter Safia Samee Ali and Joel Waldman, host of the true crime podcast Surviving the Survivor, and someone who has been advocating for justice for Ellen Greenberg in ways that are truly unmatched. Thank you both for joining me. Joel, especially you. I know you're super busy with your own podcast, and there's nobody better than you to talk to us about this case. So I want to start out with you, Joel. Your podcast has taken a deep dive and look into Ellen Greenberg's case this week as well. What do you think about the recent medical examiner's ruling that reaffirms her death or cause of death as a suicide?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Sarah, and great to be here with
Of course.
Sophia. And just listening to your intro, it's kind of mind-boggling all that has gone on over the last 14 years. This is a suspicious death from 2011, and you basically need a flow chart in order to follow, which is basically how you laid it out. So kudos to you. But to your question, I was up in Philadelphia for this hearing back in February of 2025 at the very beginning of the year. And on the eve of what was supposed to be a jury trial, finally, after 14 years, the Greenbergs were taking these, not the city of Philadelphia, but these three employees to court. And they basically said no mas. They waved the red flag and said, we want to settle. And as part of that settlement, the original medical examiner, Dr. Marlon Osborne, who happens to be down in Florida where I am, and conducted the autopsies after the Parkland school shooting. Well, he was the original medical examiner on this, and he ruled it a homicide. But it was after a closed door meeting that is very shady to most, that they reversed the ruling and then called it an unaliving or suicide. And just a week or so ago, the new medical examiner, who was just taking information from previous people, basically rehashed the original rule change and said once again that it is this suicide, just leaving people absolutely bewildered. I got a call from Sandy Greenberg, Ellen's mother.
Mhm,
She was devastated, still
mhm.
is, but they are incredibly resilient and they are moving forward. And I think this case is far from over.
So let me ask you, closed door meeting with who? Between who?
That's the thing that is so, you know, I'll tell you, Sarah, you and I are friends. I've been doing this over 27 years. I don't think there's a case that has frustrated me more personally. So I have to be careful with how I answer certain questions. And this, by the
Mhm,
way, goes all the way, in my opinion, up to the governor of Pennsylvania,
mhm,
Josh Shapiro.
mhm,
But there is no record, and there's supposed to be a record. No public record was ever made of this meeting. We know this because there was a former homicide prosecutor, a guy named Guy DeAndrea, who looked at Ellen's file, and he started to get bits of information because he was inside the
mhm,
homicide prosecutor's office. All we know was members of the police department, members of the of maybe the prosecutor's office,
Mm.
people from the medical examiner's office, which and possibly the police department, which those people generally don't meet behind closed doors. But it was after that. So I always say it's always shady in Philadelphia instead of sunny.
Yeah.
But after that meeting, they changed it to a suicide, and it just was very perplexing and continues to be that
I
way.
mean, there's supposed to be chronological notes of every step, when there's a death being investigated. If it's not from natural causes, then everything is very well documented. So that's what's so perplexing to me. And when you say eve of trial, what I wasn't aware that who was standing trial.
Okay, so there were 3 City of Philadelphia employees. There was the chief medical examiner, a guy named John Galino. Then there was a detective who originally worked the case, and this guy, Dr. Marlon Osborne. And essentially, it was a civil lawsuit. The city did end up paying. The Greenbergs have spent over $800,000 of their own money. It's important to note, too, this case has never been investigated. I mean, police showed up the night of this suspicious death. There was a nor'easter rolling in, and there was several feet of snow that fell. So it was difficult. You could throw back to like the Karen Reed story with a similar type situation, but it was a very snowy night. But that's no excuse for police to not properly secure the scene. I mean, they let Sam Goldberg, the fiance's family, come in and remove digital forensics, laptops, and cell phones. And the condominium where this happened, they brought in a cleaning service that was literally called crime scene cleanup and totally cleaned the scene. So going back to investigate this is going to be incredibly difficult, but it was just
Mhm.
a disaster by the Philadelphia Police Department.
So the parents sued these employees? Is that what was
Yeah,
going on? Okay.
yeah, they were gonna sue them individually through the city of Philadelphia. So it wasn't technically the city of Philadelphia being sued, it was employees of the city of Philadelphia. They were being represented by city of Philadelphia
Got it.
attorneys. So,
And
yeah.
and then they settled at the 11th hour.
At the 11th hour, they settled, and at the
Yeah.
11th hour, this medical examiner gave what amounts to a sworn affidavit saying, "I would re-rule this anything but a suicide." And then just a
Mm.
couple days later, Brian Enton, kudos to Brian, love
Yeah.
Brian of NewsNation, he challenged or asked the governor at a news conference, had nothing to do with this, about this situation. And the governor just completely blew it off, said there was no new evidence, just a day or 2 or 3 after the original medical examiner said, no, this is anything but a suicide.
The medical examiner now saying that he doesn't believe that it was a suicide. What would you like to see happen? Do you think there should be a new criminal investigation?
Well, look, I don't think I should speak for the city of Philadelphia and why they chose to make the decision they did. But let me just offer maybe some broader comments. First off, as a father of 4, my heart breaks for the Greenberg family.
I was just going to ask Joel. So when it went from suicide to homicide to suicide, the flip flop. I mean, you can't just like change it willy nilly. Was there evidence that just now appeared and it went from homicide to suicide, and
Mm.
then evidence appeared and it went back from homicide to like this flip flopping, or was
Uh,
everything already laid out?
Philadelphia is notorious for corruption, and I think it's tough for a lot of people to wrap their head around it that could happen. But again, this goes through a lot of important political channels, including the fiance's own family. His uncle, who he called before 911, is a criminal defense attorney, very high profile in Philadelphia at the time, and also was a judge. So, to answer your question, there was no new evidence. There was just a closed door meeting that was never on the record. But Sarah, you can speak to this. Medical examiners have sort of what is known as high immunity. You can't really challenge medical examiners. So that's really what the Greenbergs are also trying to do. They're just trying to
Mm.
have the ability for the medical examiner to even change a ruling, because right now they're essentially untouchable.
Well, I know that you can do your own independent autopsy. So I'm wondering why this family, or have they done that?
They they
Or
they they have. They've done multiple independent autopsies. There's even talk about an exhumation, and it's really disturbing. I had, by the way, on
So what
survive.
does the independent autopsy say? Homicide?
Yeah, yeah, and I'll tell you a little more
Okay.
detail. So I had her three best friends on the show last night who brought a lot of interesting insight as to the fiance. Um, but the independent autopsies show at least 11 bruises in different stages on her body outside of the 23 that now they're saying 23 stab wounds according to the latest medical examiner's report. So she has 23 stab wounds, but you got to understand at least 10 of them are to the very back of her head and the back of her neck. Independent, more
Okay.
than one independent pathologist found that one of the wounds um, was a post-mortem wound. In other words, her spine was severed, and she could
Mm,
not have inflicted the rest of the wounds because once you're dead, it's kind of hard to do that. And more than one pathologist has found that. In addition to the other bruisings, there was also marks found on her wrist. They say there's no defensive wounds. There are marks on her wrist. There's marks on her fingernails, and there is a
mm,
line, several ligature marks on her neck. So the
mhm.
pathologist believes it was a strangulation, as does her father. And so it just gets more and more curious.
What about DNA analysis? Like DNA, like you mentioned under her nails and stuff, like what have they done even if they cleaned up the crime scene, that you can't get rid of DNA. So what was done in that regard?
So this is where it gets even crazier, and I feel like I'm hogging all the airtime, Safia. So you got to jump in here. But she's found there's so many things to go over. So when Sam Goldberg, the fiance, and they're really the
Mhm,
only two people there. Number one, he claims to have broken the door down. The problem is there's a swing latch on that door, like you see in a
mhm,
hotel.
mhm,
I can't,
mhm,
that
mhm.
swings open. It is physically impossible to break into it. It's been tested by many people. You can't break into the building and have the latch stay intact. The latch would break off, but the latch was totally intact. So that's curious. He also, when he finds her, first of all, he calls his uncle and his cousin before calling 911. But when he calls them, um, when he finally calls 911, it takes over 2 minutes. She has a 10-inch knife in her chest, and it's 2 minutes into the call before he says, "Oh my God, she has a knife in her chest." He's then asked to do CPR, and he said his response is, "Do I have to?" Very odd call. Um,
I heard
and
that 911 call, and
yeah,
it was, yeah.
what do you think of it?
I mean, the way that he made it sound was that the knife was hidden. But I mean, because you're right, he didn't mention it until he's like, oh, wait, there's a knife there. And the 911 operator's like, wait, what? Because she was asking him to do CPR. And then he said, well, there's a knife. So then she's like, well, you can't do it anymore. So
Yeah,
I was like, isn't that the first thing you would see? I mean, it seemed like he wasn't able to describe it properly. And then he said that she was kind of sitting up, right? And
yeah.
kind
Mhm.
of
Well, no.
upright.
So
Yeah.
But let me just say
yeah.
this, a suicide with a knife is extremely I can't wrap my head around it, you
I'm
know?
so glad you brought that up. Sarah, let me hop in real quick. And this is maybe TMI, but it came up on our show last night. So
Mm,
one of the thing that the three basically her closest friends at the time, one is definitely the bestie, and the other two are very good friends. They
mm,
went to college together. They all knew each other for a very long time. But um, they said specifically that Ellen had literally just no threshold for pain. Like out of her friends, she just could. They said there is absolutely no way she would ever, if she was going to take her life, would do it in that fashion. And she had drugs, she had anxiety medications
mhm.
that she could have probably mixed together. I'm
Yeah,
not, as a cocktail, but
yeah,
um, but this is the TMI part. I mean, she said she literally at one point, one of the friends said, she gets a frantic call from Ellen Greenberg that she's giving herself a bikini wax and she can't finish it because she can't handle the pain. So that just goes to
yeah.
show. I mean, who's going to sit there then and stab yourself 23 times? It just
No,
doesn't
it
make
doesn't make
sense.
sense. I mean, I've seen all kinds of, suicides, and it's either a gun, pills, or strangulation, stra you know, basically choking yourself with like a something hanging over the door or whatever. That's like as painful as it gets.
Yeah.
Um,
The other
So
thing,
this
real
is very,
quick, there are all these little clues that I think add up. I mean, the 911 call. She, by the way, had a pristine white towel in her hand when she was found. To Safia's point, Sam says on the 911 call that she was flat on her back, but when they find her, instead of the blood running this way, it is running vertically down her face. So the blood um, doesn't match. And something that someone brought up to me, one of the viewers, I thought was fascinating. I never would have thought of this. Number one, I'm not a woman. Number two, I wouldn't think of doing this to myself. But they said if a woman was going to stab herself, and Ellen had beautiful hair like Safia, if they're going to do it, they're going to put their hair up. They're going to pull it up in like a ponytail or a
yeah,
bun or something.
so
Her
they
hair,
could get to their neck.
yeah, and her hair was down. So all these things, something is just not adding up.
So Joel, the medical examiner, my understanding is it says in her report that the pattern of wounds were admittedly unusual, but then she still says that Ellen could be capable of inflicting these injuries on herself. I mean, shouldn't that sort of silence the critics on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, for full disclosure, Sarah, I'm like, oh man, I'm going up against Sara Azari here. She's a criminal defense attorney. She's gonna obliterate me.
I'm just
Look,
as perplexed as you are on this story.
yeah,
I feel, I'll tell you something though. This flip-flop of suicide, homicide, I mean, this is fodder for a defense attorney if and when someone is charged to be like, yo, you don't even, it's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that it's a homicide. So I mean, that's the issue that I would raise as a defense attorney. But I mean,
yeah,
as the case stands right now and no one's charged yet, I've never seen anything like this. I
yeah.
mean,
And by
it's really, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was gonna say just to your earlier question, there was on the knife only Ellen's DNA is found, but they never tested any blood DNA. And the timeline on this is also really strange. There's so many things. Also, her father has told me that she was ready to leave the relationship. Things were
Mm,
not going well, and she actually had a bag packed that night. And anyone who knows anything about domestic violence knows the most dangerous time. And I personally don't know that. I'm now relaying what Josh Greenberg, Ellen's father, is telling me, but we all know that is the most dangerous time to leave. But the timeline, they both get home at like 1 in the afternoon. Everything
mhm,
that we know about what happened that day comes from Sam Goldberg, all of it,
mhm,
including a lot of the mental health. We know she was seeing a psychiatrist, but Sam, when he spoke to police, was really underscoring that she was depressed. And most of her friends said she wasn't really depressed. She was anxious. The
mhm,
the therapist, her therapist said she had absolutely no suicidal ideation. It wasn't a thought. She was just anxious. And it was like she was an elementary school teacher. Her friends believe she was kind of using grading students as an excuse for her stress, but it was really the underlying cause was she was no longer happy in this relationship and she
mm.
had just gotten engaged and the wedding was coming. And I think, we all know about that pressure when you're dating to get married, especially when you're younger, and all these things kind of fit into place in that way.
You touched on this. I just want to dig a little deeper. Other forensic pathologists, and this is just basic, are saying that it's biomechanically implausible that she could have stabbed herself in this way. I mean, I don't know. Like, but they also haven't done firsthand investigation on this. So how can they say this with such conviction? I mean, to me, it's basic. Like, you've got stab wounds where she did. How do you do that?
Over and over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just to be fair, and try to be, I'm not gonna. It's hard for me to deny. I have a real passion for this case, and part of look, I'm a journalist, but part of this is just you always hear prosecutors at the beginning of cases, Sarah. They say like use common sense. If you're using common sense in this case, it just doesn't add up. But
That's
yes,
what I'm saying. It's
yeah,
common sense. Like
yeah,
you don't even need a medical examiner. Like anyone can look at that and go, that's just impossible.
right. Some of the
Not
wounds.
impossible, it's implausible.
Yeah, at least I think 6 to 8 of the wounds are just like like kind of nicks, but the other
Yeah,
wounds are are substantial and they're in a very difficult place to reach. And one of the
that's what
things,
yeah.
yeah, and one of the things that people don't talk about too is that she's got this 5-inch gash, like a open wound on the top of her head. No one really knows what that's about. I just want to give a shout out to first of all, Stephanie Farr at the Inquirer broke this story wide open, but then there's a guy, Gavin Fish, who's a friend of mine, and he is like an investigative reporter, and he took the time to really go through the autopsy photos. Now he claims that there's something like, the medical examiner says 11 bruises. He counted 53 bruises on her body. 53. And the medical examiner says, oh, it's from incidental contact, from, bumping into a counter. Now, I asked her friends about that. Friends said that they have seen her naked, never seen a bruise on her body ever. It wasn't like she was anemic where she could get a bruise easily.
Yeah.
It wasn't a situation like that. So,
Well,
And that was totally
the,
sidestepped in the autopsy. The bruises were never explained.
it's correct.
Mm.
And she has, if you look at the autopsy photo, she has clear marks on her. People say, oh, she had no defensive wounds. It's not true. She has what look like, almost like handcuff or hand ties, or wrist ties around her wrist, that kind of marking, and around her neck too. I mean, where is that coming from? If she is, what is she doing? Trying to strangle herself first? I don't know. The independent pathologist, Wayne, I think it's Wayne Ross, said that he believes, again, she was strangled. Josh Greenberg, the father, believes she was strangled, and then maybe the scene was staged to look otherwise. I know that one's a little tough for me to wrap my head around, because again, like, why are you going to stage?
I mean, could there have been other suspects? I know we zero in on the significant other. They lived there, whatever, and their relationship wasn't that good. But could there have been other people that could have been looked into, or that's just not even part of the equation here?
Great question. Something people don't talk about. There was one knife used, but there's a second. There was two knives used. People always talk about the one knife, but according to the independent pathologist, there was a second unserrated knife that's never been found, that was apparently used. So that brings up an interesting point. The thing is, this was, again, a very snowy night, and police they actually bothered to look at the out there. I think they're on a higher floor, but they looked at the balcony, and there was, fresh snow with no footprint. So no one came in or out of the balcony, and it's like a key card. It's a fairly like swanky condo in a place called Mannato, which is kind of a hip part of Philly. So they use key cards to swipe in and out, and they can check everything. Sam also has a lot of, the fiance has a lot of inconsistent statements. He said that the concierge, a guy named Phil Hanton, escorted him to break in. Phil Hanton said he was never with this guy. He was never there. He's also apparently not a big workout guy, but he happens to be at the gym on the night of a nor'easter. A lot of questions. But to your answer, to your question, the answer is the only people really there that night were she and he.
Well, how about the idea that Ellen Greenberg used Google to research suicide methods? But those searches weren't added to the evidence file until like years after she died. What do you make of that? I mean, to me, that sort of goes to the idea of a suicide.
Yeah.
They weren't direct, right, Joel? They weren't direct searches.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Safia, go ahead. You take it.
So from my understanding, Sarah, these weren't like, how do I commit suicide? It was sort of like side searches where you could be typing in something about perhaps like a medicine. And then you know how it kind of autofills and says like, side effects could be suicide. So there was kind of like these off branch searches. So it was not a direct, like, how, methods to commit suicide. It wasn't like a direct search. It was sort of like these branches and off ramps. Is that correct, Joel?
That's how I understand it as well. And Google's changed obviously since 2011, but that's exactly how I understood it to be. And she was taking some anxiety medications, so she was probably looking it up to see, looking up what are the side effects. Which is fairly typical.
Right.
So that kind of falls in line. But I mean, Sarah, this is obviously, it's so far from this, but if it ever was to get to a point where there's some sort of indictment and it was were to go to trial, I guess it's sort of a defense attorney's, they'd be
Dream.
they'd be salivating because there's so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
over the
There's
14 years.
so much doubt. There's so much doubt. There's
Yeah.
so much that went wrong,
Hmm.
the cleanup, all these things are absolutely, this is what doubt means.
Hmm.
Um, and the idea that, I mean, I would even play on her anxiety. Look, she had a lot of problems. This was not abuse. It was her own battles, and she was taking medication. But I mean, from the prosecution perspective, I mean, I'm sorry, not from our perspective in our conversation, if she was taking psychotropic drugs, it would have been far easier for her to just overdose on those as
Oh,
opposed to, reach to and
that that's
continually stab herself.
that's exactly what her friends said. They just said
Yeah.
if she was gonna do it, and they said across the board that she would never do that. She
Yeah.
was like this very bubbly, kind of larger than life, always,
Mm,
and
mm,
she had kind of her mental state had degraded a little bit, over time, over the last bunch of weeks. But look, how many people do we know who get into bad relationships,
yeah.
and are gay, and they break it up, or break it off? I didn't know her, so it's hard. But in speaking to her friends, they had no doubt. It was like unequivocal that she would not, at the
Do
very
this.
least, not stab herself.
Right.
So
Now,
yeah.
I know that you're in touch with her parents. You mentioned earlier that you spoke with her mother recently. The parents were on Elizabeth Vargas's show,
Mm.
Vargas Reports. Um, there was a lot of sort of, I don't want to say animus, but there's a lot of disagreement between the two of them with respect to what's going on in this case. Is there something that you can share with us with respect to sort of how they're taking all of this, how they're processing it? What are their next steps?
Yeah, I mean, I really have come to, really care about Josh and Sandy, and it's Sandee. They've been married, I want to say 50 years. And obviously, this is a huge toll on the marriage because she was her only child.
Mm,
She was, the princess,
mhm.
as any daughter would be. And I think it's just, it's day in and day out. And this has been a fight that's been going on for 14 years. I think I can say this, and I think Josh Greenberg would agree. He's a little curmudgeony. He's a little salty at times, and
Mhm,
he's just a very blunt guy. He's honest. He's sweet, but he's very blunt.
mhm.
And sometimes I think Sandy and Josh, it's just the
They
frustration.
clash on yeah,
It's
yeah.
the frustration of this, but they're certainly on the same page in many ways. I think that they
So
deeply care about each other.
what's their plan of action? What's the next step?
So they they now, after, I mean, this is relatively new, and admittedly, like, I spoke with Sandy, and Sandy's like, we need to just kind of take a half a breath, which I think they've done now. And I think they really need to get the feds involved. There's a guy named David Metcalf who's the U.S.
Mhm,
attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania.
mhm,
The viewers who watch my show have been reaching out to the FBI director, and other people in the administration. There's a Republican attorney general. One thing I want to say is that the governor now, who has presidential aspirations, he has a memoir coming out, but he went to school. This is where it gets a little interesting. So he went to a Jewish day school. I'm talking about Josh Shapiro with this guy
mhm,
James Schwartzman's daughter, and
mhm,
the Schwartzmans were donating to his political campaign. So
mm,
there are connections within these two families. I'm not saying that Josh Shapiro is covering up a murder, but I'm also
mhm.
not saying he's not turning a blind eye. And maybe it's because he has these political aspirations, and maybe it's because he doesn't want Philadelphia to be seen as corrupt. But it is
Mm.
a fairly corrupt system there.
I mean, we've got Florida beating up on Pennsylvania. That's what this episode is about, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Look,
Sunny Florida,
I'm a Jewish
snowy
guy.
Philadelphia.
I
Uh,
say I would love to see first Jewish president, but the way he's handled this case, and I
yeah.
think he's going to run for president. I think he has to answer. He needs to start by answering Brian Enton's questions. I'll tell you that.
Right, right. Well, we don't we try not to get political on this show, but I
Mhm.
mean, I think that party needs to really come up with someone better than Shapiro at this point. So on this show, and what sets us apart is that we try to take a quick look back to some historical cases that made the headlines with somewhat similar issues, and we rely on Safia to do that. So Safia, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, I wanted to take a look at some of this battle of the medical examiner cases in notable cases, and we've got a whole bunch. So I've got my notes here. We're going to start off with Christopher Greger, who was the treadmill dad. Now, he was found guilty of aggravated manslaughter and child endangerment in the 2021 death of his 6-year-old son. He was arrested after an expert witness said the boy died, quote, as a result of blunt force impact to the chest and abdomen, and determined the manner of the child's death to be homicide. This is the case. I'm sure you guys remember the surveillance video, this awful video of this dad and this little boy running, and you could see him kind of fall flat on his face multiple times. It's awful watching it. Now, prosecutors argued that the boy died from the blunt force trauma that the ME had presented after Greger forced him on the treadmill. And then they also said it was due to the cumulative abuse the child endured at the hands of the father. Basically, this is not a one-time thing. He was going through this abuse all the time. Now, Greger's defense hired a renowned forensic pathologist who determined the boy's manner of death as natural. They said that his lawyer said it was complications from pneumonia. So this is a completely different medical opinion, which, I mean, they couldn't be further apart. Eventually, a jury obviously sided with the prosecutors, and he was convicted.
So Joel, did you cover this case on your podcast?
I did not. I did not
Okay.
cover this.
So it's really interesting. I feel like, I mean, they didn't just have any a defense expert on. They had the best. It was, forget his name, Dr. Bodden. Dr.
Yeah.
Bodden was their expert. I mean, he's renowned medical examiner, but it didn't fly. Even though he made a very compelling case for death by natural cause. I think, to be honest with you, in trials, when there's a piece of really ugly evidence, you lose the jury, and I think that treadmill video was so awful and horrific. And I kept, like I kept slow-moing it and watching it to try to look for some angle to argue. And I was like, well, he did kind of slow it down after, and everyone's like, shut up, Sarah. Well, they were, dad and son, they were working out in the gym. It was like bro time, and he did bring it down. They're like, don't even go there, I'm like, all right. But that video was like, he was done. He was done. I think when the jury saw that, it was like, I don't care what Dr. Bodden was saying from a scientific standpoint. I think that was the golden nugget in that case. Sophia, I don't know what your thoughts are on
mean,
this.
I completely agree with you. I think with a video that is just so
damning,
it evokes
it's like
completely damning.
Diddy's DV video, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it was you can't sidestep that. And then you can see that father, it was just so callous. Like, he didn't even feel bad for the son. He just kept saying, get up, do it again, get up, do it again. Even though this little boy, he's 6 years old, kept falling. And you could see that he's this tiny little boy. And I mean, I think as a juror, it's really hard to put that aside and say, okay, it wasn't that, it was pneumonia. Yeah.
I have to be easier on my 6-year-old at soccer and t-ball practice. I'm yelling at him. So guilty.
Yeah, be careful, because but then you can call me. You got me. What else do we have? We have Casey Anthony. Right?
We do have Casey Anthony. So in 2011, Casey Anthony went to trial after being accused of killing her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Very high profile case. I'm sure you both are very familiar with it. Kind of swept the nation at the time. Now, really interesting thing. The cause of death for Kaylee was officially ruled a, quote, homicide by undetermined means by the medical examiner. So no firm cause of death here. The chief medical examiner spent nearly 2 weeks examining the body and concluded the manner of death was homicide based on the circumstances, including the discovery of her body, which had been hidden. And they basically said that there was no evident trauma to Kaylee's skeleton. The prosecutors said that Casey Anthony murdered her daughter by administering chloroform and then covering her face with duct tape because she didn't want to be a mother anymore. She just wanted to get rid of this daughter. Defense claimed the death was an accidental drowning. Casey Anthony was ultimately acquitted of these charges.
Joel, that was in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, that was the Orlando area. It was Jose Baez who made his
Yeah.
name on that case. He's now trying another case with a woman named Shanna Gardner and a murder for hire plot. I mean, to this day, um, Casey Anthony still might be the most hated woman in America. She was
Mhm.
recently out dating, but she got a Bella Vita tattoo, the beautiful life, after the death of her daughter. It was odd, you know. They obviously they tried to pin it all on her father, Sarah, which is you know, if you're a criminal
Yeah.
defense attorney and you're trying to sew up, you know, dust up reasonable doubt, that's not a bad tactic, and it
Mhm.
worked. But I think it blew everyone's mind. I don't think there was anyone watching that trial at the time who did not think that there was going to be a guilty verdict on all counts. And
Mm.
I think she was found guilty of lying to law enforcement or something and had time served and walked out, I think. So
Yeah.
that blew the minds of a lot of people. I think it still does.
Yeah. And then I think we have one more.
We do, yes. The last one, this is also a really wild case, very sad. Now, in 2016, Texas executed Richard Masterson, even though there were questions on whether or not there was any murder that was even done. He was convicted of murdering. It was a partner that he was with. So the medical examiner, after having been told that Masterson confessed to putting a sleeper hold on the victim during an episode of erotic asphyxiation, ruled the victim's death a homicide, and then testified that the victim had died by strangulation. So essentially, heard this and just, I guess, went along with it. Now, Masterson's attorneys argued that he falsely confessed to the murder charges during a period of withdrawal from an addictive substance where he was having these suicidal inclinations. Now, they also argued that prosecutors had concealed evidence that this medical examiner was unqualified to perform the victim's autopsy, botched the autopsy, falsified his credentials, and gave false testimony in this case and in other capital murder trials. Two pathologists who examined the victim's autopsy for the same one said the most likely the cause of death was a heart attack.
Hmm.
That medical examiner was subsequently fired as chief medical examiner in El Paso County. Masterson was still executed, even though this was
Hmm.
all kind of going on.
Welcome
It shows you how important medical examiners are.
Welcome to Texas. They don't mess around. Texas and Florida, they don't mess around. They figure that out after they put you to death. But yeah, that was a
Yeah.
crazy case too. And you know, again, the defense claimed it was, you know, this sexual erotic asphyxiation,
Mhm.
and you know, to Safia's point, maybe they didn't figure that out till after they put this guy to sleep.
Mhm.
I mean, this was already being contested prior to the execution. It just didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is just, you can just think about how awful that is.
I mean, for the
Yeah, I
family,
think what
for his
needs.
yeah,
Yeah, go
I was
ahead.
gonna
Go
say
ahead.
for his family and for defense attorneys, it's got to be infuriating, right, Sarah? Because
Yeah.
if you can get
Yeah.
up there and you have any evidence to prove that it wasn't, you know,
A homicide.
homicide, then you're, you know, you should have your chance. You should have your day in court before you're executed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, it's really interesting because it, at the end of the day, it's a battle of experts kind of situation. I mean, Greenberg obviously isn't even there yet. But in a trial setting, you've got the battle of experts. But even with the best expert and the best theory, I think that ultimately, if the rest of the evidence is bad, it kind of doesn't matter. That's sort of what I see as a common denominator. But anyway, Joel Waldman, thank you so much for giving us a big chunk of your time today. I hope you come back and join us again. And Safia, as always, thank you so much. Thank you to our viewers. And until next week, the defense rests.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.